Hello, my name is Micheál Martin, Tánaiste Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence. Welcome to the latest episode of my podcast, In Conversation. And today I'm joined by a man who everyone in the country knows after the last few years. He's a world-renowned and award-winning immunologist, professor of biochemistry, as well as being an author, a broadcaster, radio host, musician, and many, many other things. But he has an extraordinary scientific curriculum vitae. He has won numerous research awards, including the European Federation of Immunology Societies medal. And of course, in 2018 and 22, he was named by Clarivate Thomson Reuters as one of the world's most influential scientists, ranking in the top 1% in immunology. And he has a host of other awards as well: the Royal Irish Academy Gold Medal for Life Sciences, the Royal Dublin Society Boyle Medal for Scientific Excellence, and so forth. Many of us would have become very aware of him during the period of COVID-19 with his articles in the Sunday Independent, and of course his many radio conversations and so forth. But today we're here to discuss a range of issues. First of all, I want to put to you, or to ask you, if you could share with us your journey, and in particular your work in immunology, because many people may not realise that your work in research in particular has driven Ireland to the top 1% in terms of published research in the immunological field.
It's true. Happy to be here. Tánaiste, by the way, thanks for inviting me. Always happy to talk science, as you know, to anybody who listen. But it's true, yeah, I'm an immunologist, and I came back to Ireland in 2001 from the UK. I trained in the UK.
Yeah.
And then almost from that moment on, immunology began to grow. It wasn't just me, by the way, but I was part of this change. And many of my great colleagues, and you know their names, Kingston Mills, for example.
Yes.
These people became household names, peculiarly, in the pandemic, and they all began to deliver. And suddenly then we found ourselves going up the ranks. And I think it was about 6 years ago, we were number one in the world in immunology, if you can believe it. This is kind of normalised per person, so it's not as if, like, Harvard has probably more immunologists than Ireland.
Yep.
But the thing is, they were all delivering massively, making fantastic discoveries. And the great thing is, Micheál, it's everything from vaccines to inflammatory diseases. Immunology spans nearly every disease that afflicts us. So all our research then is highly relevant for hopefully getting new medicines. And it was wonderful to see Ireland perform in that area. And it's not just, I think there's probably 3 areas in science as a whole where Ireland has really shone in a way, and really risen through the ranks, I guess.
Yeah, because I was in an earlier life as Minister for Education, I was involved in the PRTLI programme and just trying to develop research funding to a newer level. And so it was very rewarding to see that feedback come, because of course you have a lot of naysayers. You know, a lot of people were saying, why is Ireland investing in research? So we should be really borrowing research from other locations. I never went with that, but it is important that when the investment happens, there are significant yields for the world, but also for Ireland in terms of added value, in terms of investment coming into the country to follow the research and to be with the research.
The value add is huge, as you know. I mean, and in fact, Science Foundation Ireland, when it began, again, there were naysayers, and I knew them. And I was making the case, I've got a vested interest. But that investment pays back 9-10-fold if you look at it actually economically for a start, right? The big thing for me, though, actually, it's about talent. We have great talent in this country. Our education system is producing wonderful young people. And if we don't support them, they'll go somewhere else, and then we'll lose out on that. And that's another aspect. I've always thought of it as like, if you've got great footballers and you don't build the football stadiums, it'd be disastrous, you know. And big credit, by the way, the PRTLI programme was transformational for Ireland educationally, and also in our performance globally. And the building I'm in, the Biomedical Sciences Institute, €120 million from the taxpayer came through the PRTLI system for that. It's delivered in the past 10 years hugely. And one good example I give is one company I founded. We got bought by Roche, a big Swiss drug company. That returned 60 million to the Irish taxpayer. From Switzerland, remember, you know. And that began with a grant from Science Foundation Ireland in that building. Now we need the building because you need facilities. Without that, we couldn't have done it. And the other thing I always state, Micheál, is when I came back to Ireland, I was trained in Cambridge, and I was offered a job in Trinity. And my boss said, "Don't go there; it's a backwater." He said, "You should stay here in Cambridge or go to America." And I went back to kind of defy him. Now, I couldn't have done it without Science Foundation Ireland, because it's a bit like, again, I need money to do my research, don't I? I'll go wherever the money is.
100%,
kind of, you know, so
and you have to bring the talent in, as well as growing our own homegrown talent. And Mary Harney did great work with
Great
Science
job,
Foundation
Mary
Ireland for setting it up.
She championed that hugely.
And the PRTLI, actually, we partnered with Chuck Feeney, the late philanthropist, who actually came up with 120 million that we matched as a government to create the first sort of PRTLI and have a free
and that must be very useful that must internally to make the case that you're getting private money coming in with public is a really key part. Right?
But he also changed, I think, how we did research, the peer review, international peer review. It wasn't just because you knew somebody anymore you might get a research grant. It was because you had to step up to the plate and do your SWOT analysis and so on.
It should just be about excellence. That's the only criterion we should use. And Mary Harney brought in Bill Harris, as you may remember.
I remember him well, yeah.
The only metric for Bill was excellence.
Yes,
forget anything else. And you won't go wrong if you follow excellence.
Yeah, because I was down at the Microbiome Institute recently, and that's another sort of outcome of all of that. And they're more leading now in terms of disease of the gut. Yeah. And it's fascinating. You know?
That I hate to say it, Micheál, that probably is number one, and immunology slipped down a bit.
And
full credit to Fergus Shannon, you know him, and John Cryan.
I was with them recently, John Cryan,
and it's spectacular.
The way they can explain it to the public and to children in particular is fantastic.
And it's useful for me, strangely. Whenever I go to places, they've all heard of the APC in Cork and microbiome stuff. So globally, it's famous. Ireland's doing good there as well.
That's why we set up the new Department of Higher Education and Research. And I think we can do more. We have to do more. And I think we need to get into a new era of fourth level research. Yep. In terms of your specifics of your work, I'm interested in, and I think people have been very interested in the type of things you were saying around dealing with, in inflammatory conditions, what can deal with it. I mean, and just for the public at large, I mean, cold water swimming. Does that help?
It does. It does scientifically prove it. Yeah, that's a strange one. Yeah,
definitely has it because I'm.
Oh, yeah, it has.
I did a New Year's Day swim. I do it every year.
Well,
and I had a cold coming into it, and the GP says, "Man, I'm not sure you should go in." I said, "I have no choice. I'm up in every post where I'm going in. Everyone thinks I'm doing it. I have to do it." And the young lad says to me, "It's proven to be good for you." He said, "It's fine." He does it every day. The younger fellow. But apparently it kind of generates your immune system.
There's a few aspects to it. It must be said. Let's face it. I mean, it's a big de-stressor. That's the first thing because you're distracted by the cold water. Secondly, it gets your circulation going, and that's a great thing for your immune system because your immune white blood cells are in your blood. Your blood flows a bit faster. That kind of wakes them up. It's literally like that. The analogy I like surfing on little surfboards, kind of. And again, when you come out, all your blood vessels are firing away. A big one is social, actually. They reckon because often you go as a group with friends.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's massively beneficial. And any kind of social activity is good for us, of course. But often cold swimmers, they'll all complain together kind of thing and have a bit of camaraderie.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And that's really good as well. So it's not just the cold water. There's a few things going on there as well.
Because the post-COVID, I've noticed a growth in groups who are actually doing cold water swimming all over the country. It's kind of a phenomenon, almost it happened obviously before COVID, but it seems to be a post-COVID
they got the habit. We're creatures of habit, remember. So you get into a routine, you keep doing it. But I'm a big I don't do it myself, by the way, as a hypocrite, but my wife goes in a lot.
I regret I don't do more of it.
Yeah, I'd like to do more myself. But it's really beneficial. And in fact, overall, you can help your immune system in all kinds of ways, remember. And your immune system is your best friend because it fights infection. We know that part very clearly. If it goes off kilter, you're at much higher risk of arthritis, diabetes, heart disease, cancer. All those diseases involve the immune system not working properly, if you like, and not defending you in the right way. So if you keep your immune system healthy, you'll decrease the risk of all these diseases. And it's the things we're talking about. Exercise is the big one, mainly because your blood's flowing, and that's really good for you as well. Stress is a huge negative on the immune system.
I was going to ask you about that.
And your body pumps out a thing called cortisol. Now, cortisol turns off the immune system, and so therefore you've got to try to de-stress as best you can because that will benefit your immune system overall. And any kind of relaxation or whatever you can do to de-stress is really important.
And music likewise.
Music, another great one. That's really important. And in fact, again, the scientists have studied this. One I love is they got people to listen to music and relax, and then they measured their immune system after. You can measure the immune system. You had a blood sample and can measure the white blood cells. They were a third stronger. Isn't that great? A third stronger once you've had listened to some music and you've relaxed in the listening process. And whatever's going on there, we don't know in the brain, but music is a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Music is one of your first love. I mean, you're in a band and all of that.
That's my second passion. After science, I almost at one time I was almost going to be a musician when I was in Cambridge training. I was in a band and we were taking it more and more seriously, and it didn't go down that road. And as Philip King, who you might know, Philip, I've got to know him over the years.
Who doesn't know Philip? He's a Cork man, of course.
He is a Cork man.
And very persuasive.
And he said to me once, he says, music's loss is science's gain. Is his phrase, the way he put it. That's quite nice for Philip to say that.
Other Voices.
Other Voices.
And I was with Other Voices the year before last down in Dingle. With Philip. And he's in Wales as well. He's doing some fantastic work there, which is helping to closed the bond, if you like, or sealed the bond between Ireland and Wales culturally in the modern world. And he's just a very imaginative, creative guy.
Yes, and a huge fan of music being beneficial, remember. And that whole, you see, when I was younger, you just enjoyed music. You didn't really think about it, you know. But now we know it's quite good for us as well.
And what I'm interested in, I remember I heard you saying sometimes that children learning a musical instrument can be particularly beneficial later in life from a cognitive point of view.
Absolutely, because their brain, it's very complicated music. If you think about it too much, of course, it can take the joy out of it. But let's not worry about that for a minute. Learning a musical instrument, you're activating all these neuronal pathways in the brain of the child, and that builds up other strengths in that child's brain. And then it is a massive de-stressor if you're an adult, because you're concentrating on the music. You're learning a new skill. And what I love is, Micheál, being in a choir protects against Alzheimer's. There's very clear evidence. If you join a choir in your 50s, right?
Really? Okay.
The incidence of Alzheimer's is lower in those people 10, 15, 20 years later. Really? And they think it's because it's like doing a puzzle. Learning music is a complicated thing, and you're using your brain muscle and flushing out the toxins that might be having your risk of Alzheimer's, for example. And then secondly, the social thing is a real protector from Alzheimer's. Any kind of social activity. Being in a choir is wonderfully social. And the third thing is you're performing artistically and you're giving something to the community.
Yes.
And hopefully if you're any good, the audience loves it, and you get a kick for that as well, you see. So
because I think some of the wonderful organisations that I've come across, the National Youth Orchestra in Cork, we have the Cork Youth Orchestra with Tomas heading it up. And you see this wonderful group of young people all having to study particular pieces of music and so on like that, and to do all the training. But it's the social aspect of it always struck me as being fantastic.
Key to it as well.
And therefore, so the future is good for them potentially in terms of their cognitive.
And of course it's great for kids. It distracts them from getting off their bloody devices, for instance, which is the wonderful thing.
Absolutely.
There's all kinds of benefits for kids.
No, our problem though, when I grew up in school, you see, there was a guy. I don't know, you remember, and showing my age here now, the teacher trying to work out who had a musical...
an ear for music.
He'd bang a thing off the thing and...
That's right.
Say, I don't... And back to the back of the class, you're not participating in the music. It was cruel, I mean...
That's right.
What damage he's done to us.
I know, it was strange days, weren't they?
Absolutely,
I think the device thing's worth talking about. I know you've got a passion about that yourself, for instance.
But I'm always watching, and I said it, I met, and we could talk later about Dr. Anthony Fauci earlier this week, and I asked him a basic question, because having been a Minister for Health, it gives you a lifelong interest in health, matters health. And from a family perspective, my own father's parents died when he was very young. He was about 14 or 15. And I'd say it was all of these diseases, cardiovascular or whatever. So he had a kind of a passion for how do we live longer, basically. And he outlived anyone in his generation, or his parents' generation. So that idea of longevity and lifespan and so on like that, I've always been interested in. And in terms of public health, the intersection between public policy and public health, it seems to me that the public health threat of our time now is the impact of smartphones, social media on children.
No doubt about it.
In terms of, and you mentioned a point about socialization. If you're on these machines, you're not talking to
them. It's malignant, Micheál, I'd say, and I like the passion you've got into this, and we have to do something about it. I think the trick, hearing you speak, I began looking at it a bit. There has to be some way to block people under 18 accessing these sites, and there has to be technological. You can't tell parents to tell their kids not to do it, so that's not going to work. Nor can the government make it illegal necessarily either. But can you imagine a 15-year-old boy, and he goes on his phone and he tries to access a site? The phone has to verify he's over 18 just by scanning his retina. That sort of technology is where this should go eventually, and he's blocked from that site. And that other people are saying this. It needs a technological solution. Now, you can still use the phone to call up his parents or whatever. But all the social media stuff, certain ones you have to be over 18 basically, and you could get locked out if you're under 18. And they're trying to come up with a way to do this accurately. Facial recognition can do it up to a point. In other words, you can scan someone's face and say he's 11 years of age. That's one possibility. You know? And if we can get that really accurate, and age verification technologically, that might be a way to solve this, and we desperately need to solve this.
And do you think from a scientific point of view that's doable?
I think so.
I mean, when we go through security, the
scan
facial recognition stuff is used.
That's the way it has to go, and they're working hard on this now. And then the companies will have to implement that into their software as well, and that will be a massive add-on. the age recognition thing when you're on a smartphone. That's one way, possibly, if they can do it. There's privacy, the usual issues. So I said this to someone yesterday, and it's a bit like buying drink and getting someone to go into the off license and buy a drink for you. You could put the phone up to an old person's face and access it that way. So there's possibly a loophole. But overall, that would have a big impact, I think, to exclude people under 18. But the big
challenge is, do the companies really want to do that? It's just part of the business model.
It's like big tobacco.
It's very similar, unfortunately.
Thing.
I mean,
as the evidence grows, it's malignant. The evidence is growing and growing. The evidence is, especially in young teenagers, especially young females, this is a disastrous thing for their mental health.
And the research is growing, isn't it?
Absolutely. The evidence is accumulating all the time on this, which is going to be very useful to make the case, I think. Yeah. And I worry about it with the students in Trinity, because we see more anxiety, we see more stress. It's putting them under huge pressure, basically. Yeah. And that makes it a really important thing to try to solve.
I was talking to someone earlier this week who was overseeing a collection of essays that came in from young students, and she couldn't get over the darkness of the essays and issues around mental health. They were kind of the common theme of most of the essays.
Yeah, that's shocking, isn't it? And that just tells you, doesn't it, as
well?
It does. There's something going on there that's very disturbing, I think.
Absolutely.
And we owe it to our children, don't we, to try and protect them against this kind of thing. And
absolutely. But my worry is what damage has been done before we actually get around to resolving some of this.
Who would have thought, though, Micheál, a device as wonderful as a smartphone? Because it was a great thing initially, wasn't it?
But it's the point. We welcomed it with open arms.
We did. We thought it was brilliant.
We welcomed the internet age. Remember Tom Friedman's books, The World is Flat. The World is Flat, hot and crowded, great place to be. We can email someone in India and China, and the world's going to get smaller, etc., etc. And look what's happened. And I think it probably gives us an opportunity with AI to maybe just structure or embrace, and we have to embrace AI. It's lots of positives in AI from research and from medical interventions and so on like that. But we've also got to put the guardrails up to protect people.
AI should crack this, because the AI technology should be able to tell someone's age by looking at their face, basically. That's the idea here, And AI would be great for blocking malignant content as well, and spotting haters, and having a more editorial position on these things.
The companies tell me that they are working on all sorts of technological approaches to weed out the hate stuff more frequently. The problem is, you get some actors now on social, like, it's clear to me that X isn't going to be interested in sorting any of this out. No. Their model is heading in one direction, but nonetheless, the others at least are engaging with society and community to say, how can we do this better, as opposed to the human eye trying to weed it all out. That you get technological interventions that can weed the hate stuff and all of that.
Exactly. And the good news is they are trying, and there's many academics now trying to bring their expertise to this as well, to try and solve this problem. And of course, the trick, as you know, is how do you keep freedom of speech alive in a situation when that's the worry, in a sense. If it's too restrictive, you're in trouble as well. Yeah. And I don't know what the answer is, but the biggest worry I have, as we just said, is our teenagers. They're the ones to worry about here, really, and hopefully we can do something to help them.
Because the common theme of what you've been saying from the beginning, in terms of all those interventions that improve the immune system, it's around people getting together in groups, be it the choir, be it the music festival, whatever like that. And this is the antithesis of that, isn't it? I mean, this is actually putting people into corners and into silos very, very quickly.
We evolved 200,000 years ago on the plains of Africa to be together socially. That we're a social species,
Exactly.
Now, you can recreate that a little bit with you can have a community online, and that's somewhat okay. But the truth is, you got to be in 3D. Let's put it that way.
The one thing I learned during COVID, politics didn't work online.
No, I'd say not.
God, parliamentary
you couldn't
party,
see the nuance. Yes.
People were cranky. They could sit and wander around the kitchens. And the problem was they were there for the night.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. There was no match to go to. There was no one rushing out anywhere.
They were stuck.
Party leaders on the screen. He's going to be there for another 2 hours.
That's right. It didn't work.
It just didn't work out. And amazingly, the new TDs didn't have the sort of normal sort of experiences of when you come in first, you talk to someone who's been in politics maybe 10 years, and they say to you, look, that's how you deal with that problem, and that's how you deal with this, and so on like that. So they missed all of that. They missed all that. 2 years, and there was considerable angst from this online thing. So anyway, I'm not a great fan of the online totally.
Although it did help. I think I wouldn't be. It did help. It was okay. It helped us a little bit. If we didn't have it, would have been a different world entirely. So it probably was okay. But I agree with you. And in my business, all the conferences stopped, and then that was disastrous, because you go to a conference to meet the guy over a cup of coffee.
Correct.
And one word borrows another idea. That couldn't happen on Zoom. We noticed that wasn't happening. So we're all delighted to be back out there again.
Yeah, I was just bring it back to, Anthony Fauci, who was the guest of the Royal College of Physicians during the week and received the Stern Medal. Luckily, I met him at that dinner that evening, and he was fascinating, particularly in terms of, and he sort of started in your field, I think, wasn't it? Anti-inflammatories and all of that. And then he said he got involved in the infection because of HIV. And people of today's generations might not remember this, but it was quite stark what he said. He said, as a medical practitioner, every patient he met, I think from about 82 to 87, died. So you had this very fatalistic situation where your patients are coming in, you can do nothing. And research was his sort of avenue to try and deal with that. And then he spoke about his meetings with George W. Bush, which was quite extraordinary because people don't remember George W. Bush in terms of being the guy. And Fauci said it was because he had a moral sort of position on people not being able to get access to the medicines that had been developed because of where they lived. And hence you had the big programs for Africa that Anthony Fauci made. Really, that's Fauci's great achievement.
That's his biggest achievement. He saved about 25 million lives, himself, Fauci, directly, which is a huge thing to claim, isn't it? Let's face it.
I think it's enormous. I mean, it just took off the lip the other day.
And I love that story as well anyway, because HIV, as you and I remember, it was Freddie Mercury was a great example. We all remember him. Yeah. It was a death sentence. And then the drug companies, let's give them credit, stepped up, made the drugs that killed the virus, and then it became clear that this was now a treatable disease. The next question became access to the drugs. And as you have just said, poor countries could not get access to them for whatever, global economic reason. And Fauci and Bono, let's give Bono credit as well, by the way. He intervened and he was part of the campaign in Congress to convince them to put billions into this. The American administration paid for this, you see.
They did,
And that's another credit to them. And so it's a great story for Fauci because he championed all that.
And it doesn't show what public policy can do.
Indeed.
If it's combined with medicine.
And of course he knew if it worked in Africa, work anywhere. And increased uptake in the US too, remember. And now HIV, AIDS, you can live with it for life. It's incredible. It's incredible, as an example of a technological breakthrough. And at the time, I worked on HIV a bit myself. It was hard to avoid as an immunologist because when it was a bit like COVID, in the late 80s when it was breaking, we all began to work on it to try and understand it.
Yeah, he was saying no one had a clue.
No clue, exactly. It was
no
a
clue
big
what
mystery.
It was.
And it was a great thrill for me, a bit like COVID. I went through this first with HIV because watching the discoveries come thick and fast was a big thrill.
Yeah, of course.
And when they found those drugs, we knew this is a way out. Now, the tragedy was we couldn't get a vaccine. There's still no vaccine. It's impossible to vaccinate against HIV. And the reason is it lives inside your immune system, this virus, and kills it. And you're trying to get a vaccine to build up the immune system, and it's countering your immune system directly. That's one reason why it's so hard. And instead what happened was they made drugs to kill the virus. Now, with COVID, it was the opposite. We got a vaccine pretty quickly.
Yes.
But there are still drugs that kill COVID. Paxlovid was the famous one. That's a bit like the drugs for HIV. It kills the virus directly.
Okay.
It's a chemical that kills the virus. The vaccine, of course, gets your own immune system to kill the virus. But we've never got that with AIDS. And we'd love a vaccine for AIDS, Micheál. That's the real answer. There's still millions of people dying of AIDS, by the way, in Africa.
Yes,
The dreaded phrase hasn't gone away. It's true. So we'd love a vaccine. And again, we're hoping now the COVID technology that works so well.
Is that the mRNA?
Or exactly. The RNA technology should now, hopefully, could work against HIV, which would be brilliant.
That'd be fantastic.
And the second big disease to mention while I'm at is malaria. That's killing 2 million kids a year. Again, we're seeing progress at last now with vaccines for malaria, again using some of these new technologies. So the COVID dividend for me isn't so much we've dealt with COVID, which is great anyway, as we know. It's diseases like malaria and HIV. So we're hoping to see a bit of progress there. Of course, many things can go wrong, and it's a tough old business. But still, massive amount of interest in malaria now as well. And so the hope is one day we'll get vaccines for HIV and malaria.
Yeah, because you mentioned the pharmaceutical companies there, and we have a lot in Ireland. And sometimes I think that role gets missed in the public debate. Governments, by definition, don't have the resources and will never have the resources to research and experiment on the formation of medicine, if you like, or discovery of medicine and getting medicines ready. I mean, some people say it can take $1 billion to get one particular medicine. And as an enterprise minister, I engage with many of the pharmaceutical companies, and some of their outputs are quite extraordinary in terms of killing disease and so forth. Because I always remember the late Brian Lenihan Sr. He had liver issues. I remember him saying after he got his transplant that it was the output of pharmaceutical companies enable them to stay alive.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. Some people dig into them for various reasons, but the fact is, they're the ones making the medicines at risk. Now that they're very profitable businesses, let's not deny it. But the fact is, and I have collaborations over the years. They fund students in my lab. There's a lot of interactions with us and them. They need us actually. Us academics often bring the idea to them.
Yes,
and they've got the skill to run with it and make it.
Increasingly, they're looking to smaller companies or
very much so.
A group of researchers to come up with a magic idea. Yeah. The company has the scale, if you like, then to scale the product. Like BioNTech and Pfizer in a way.
Well, exactly.
Some people say Pfizer was the marketing genius, but BioNTech did
well, that's a great example. That began in the universities. Often have the mavericks doing the wacky stuff. You see.
Yeah.
And then the university academic makes a fascinating finding. In the case of those vaccines, a woman called Katlin Carrico, she gets the credit, and Drew Weissman. They were in the University of Pennsylvania. Couldn't get funding. Their stuff was seen as completely wacky, right?
That's right.
And next thing, then she went to BioNTech and said, "Will you develop this?" Because she knew they were a company who could do it. BioNTech took it up, and then the might of Pfizer got. Now Pfizer are like the Borg; they're a fantastic drug company. They got behind it, and they made it work. And without Pfizer, BioNTech wouldn't have delivered on it either.
No, they couldn't,
because it's very complicated. It's very expensive as well. Remember, now the last part of the story, though, we've got to give Trump a bit of credit, because Operation Warp Speed, the U.S. government realised we won't crack this through public health measures, because they won't listen to us. They won't wear the masks. They won't socially distance. They knew a medical solution, and they helped Pfizer by giving them a couple of billion in the end. And Pfizer needed that, because internally in Pfizer they're going, we're not going to waste money on this, because it was a commercial decision.
Vaccines were not actually.
Well, the other shocking fact I learned recently, and I knew this at the time, the two biggest vaccine companies in the world are GSK and Merck. Now they're in Ireland as well, of course. We welcome them here for their production. They make the vaccines. They're famous for vaccines. In June of 2020, they said it's too hard. We can't do it. They looked at it and said it's too hard. We're not going to get there. It'll take us 2-3 years. Now, when I heard that, my face fell, because here are the two big guys saying we can't do it. And lo and behold, Pfizer said, "Oh, we'll give it a go," And AstraZeneca, the other, remember, the AstraZeneca took it on, and both companies were using a brand new technology never used before for vaccines. So it was risky, and yet they took it on. And if they hadn't,
where would we be
now?
The
pandemic would have gone on for 2, 3, 4 years.
This is what I find, you get all the people saying, we didn't have to do this, and and knocking vaccines and so on. The vaccine was the lifesaver.
We knew that.
I don't think society could have held too much longer. No. It was getting raggy.
Well, you would have. It was easy to predict what was going to happen next. You would have had a series of lockdowns in succession. Schools would have closed again. Can you imagine? We're in 2022, no vaccine. We would have had to have more restrictions. There's no question, because new variants were cropping up, as you might remember, and they're more malignant than the previous one. And who knows what would have happened? It's a terrifying.
It would have been very hard to hold the line in society.
It would have been impossible.
Well,
you would have had social unease and civil unrest. And all
some of the lessons you learn is lockdowns have to be of a certain duration and timeline. If you overdo it in terms of length of time, you run out of steam.
Exactly.
People just turn off anyway.
People just get fed up, don't they?
Exactly.
And they want to get their lives back. So it would have been very tricky, I think.
And it's also very tricky with IP and intellectual property. And I mean, that's a very important concept which gets tossed about the place. And I felt the European Union responded well in saying, look, what we really need to do is build capacity up in Africa to manufacture.
That's right.
To have the people with all of the knowledge and the know-how to develop a medicine in a particular facility and so on. And that we would fund that from a European perspective, fund that capacity.
And the EU is very important in all this, by the way, as well. The scientific fact to me is very simple. Those vaccines saved 20 million lives. That's the bottom line. Right? Now, you give me any weapon in a war that will save 20 million people, and that's what happened. And 1.5 million in the EU were saved by the vaccine. They would have died otherwise, right? And so it's always a mystery to me why people were against this idea, Now, obviously, there can be side effects.
Of course.
Every treatment,
sometimes
even aspirin
I think
and paracetamol,
states could be more upfront, or public health could be more upfront that there will be side effects, and we'll deal with them, and we'll support people.
Exactly.
That's what we should be better at, I think.
Precisely.
Because if you look through the history of the country, and if Mark Henry's book, Ireland at 100 Facts, all the diseases that were killing Irish people in 2021, 22, 23 were all sorted more or less by vaccines.
Yeah, that's right.
Infectious diseases were killing us.
Precisely.
And the big changes, TB and all that kind of things, diphtheria, I think, was a big killer at the time, and so on like that.
Yep.
And it's quite a simple intervention in some respects that can be preventable. And that's why on the public health field, and we were discussing it earlier, and in Uruguay in particular, where they have literally taken salt off the restaurant
right.
tables and so on like that.
And
because they had a high, from their perspective, an overusage of salt. And I'm interested in that concept. And we had the same thing in terms of smoking, but also in the teeth and in the fluoride.
The fluoride, yep.
And I set up a forum. There was uproar. There was people dead against it. States intervening. But everyone in oral health will tell you it transformed our oral health and teeth in particular, particularly in disadvantaged communities. There's a phenomenal change.
No doubt about it. Yeah.
And we spoke about bifida and whether or not we would have folic acid in bread, for example, in all our bread, that could have a radical impact. And the fear from the state's perspective is that it gets accused of being in any state and intervening too much. On the other hand, it's a fairly simple preventative interventions that could have really radical health outcomes.
Exactly. You've got a tough job because you know what I mean. I admire politicians trying to make a difference in this, because there will be naysayers. There'll be reasons not to do things. There's always 1,000 reasons to say no, as you well know. And in public health especially, there's all kinds of reasons to be slightly cautious. Yeah. You got to go with the evidence. What does the scientific evidence tell us? Nothing will be perfect anyway, but still there'll be sufficient evidence behind something to take a certain course of action. And approving those vaccines, and all the health agencies in the world approve them separately. Remember, they all looked at the data themselves. And then you can see a bit of progress, I guess. And I think the folic acid is a colleague of mine, John Scott in Trinity. He was the one who linked folate deficiency to spina bifida in his research. And he was just a biochemist doing studies, and lo and behold, the evidence became compelling. So it's interesting how that can emerge as well. And Uruguay was a fascination when I was there at a conference, and I was in a restaurant, and there was no salt. And I asked the waiter, and he said, "Oh no, we don't allow salt in the restaurants." I said, "Why?" "Oh, well, the government policy is let's decrease salt use." They put salt in the kitchen in the food, by the way. It's not as if it's tasteless either.
Well, you see, like I gave up salt 30 years ago.
Right.
I don't have any salt, and my wife does, and we're dealing with. We have that row every now and again. But I worked at a bakery when I was a student. See, but I could see the salt going into the mix, right? Buckets of salt into the mix, you know. And so salt is in everything we eat. So there's a huge case for reducing
getting rid of the salt
intake, you know, that kind of thing, you know. But I mean, some government to be able to do it
isn't amazing. And I look closely at it. There's a tax incentive for restaurants not to have salt on the table.
Was there?
Oh, there is. That was part of the motivation. And then all the public-run canteens and hospitals and so on, the government run those anyway. No salt in those.
I think we're getting better in Ireland, but I often was kind of taken back at in earlier years, really a lack of focus on the nutritional side of health in hospitals.
Yeah.
I mean, some hospitals give 1 million meals a year or more, you know, and sometimes it's the one meal, you know, whereas each person with a different condition might want something lighter or whatever like that. I know it's not easy, it's an organisational issue, but to me, because I'm fascinated with food and read a few books on it and so on like that in terms of, so is it true, you know, the roasted tomato or a grilled tomato?
Oh, that kind of thing.
It's probably the healthiest thing you'll ever have.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Better carotene comes out.
That's right.
So I really drive people mad when I sort of say things like this to them. You know, have a heated tomato. That's far better for you. Far better for you. In terms of longevity or whatever like that.
That's
you know?
Right. Yeah.
But I think we can do more on it, and I think it's getting better. You know, it's getting better.
I think the big issue is, as you know, processed food is actually damaging for your immune. Getting back to that'll damage your immune system. Okay. High fructose is really bad for your immune system, and we know that. You know. Yeah. So the question is, can we control the processed food? A good line I like is, Micheál, you should eat stuff that's recognisable as food. That's a great phrase.
Great
line.
Yeah,
and if you try and keep to that, you'll
that's what the markets are helping
diseases.
As well. You know,
you'll decrease these inflammatory.
You'll actually decrease them.
Oh yeah. No, the big one is there's been in the last 50 years, there's been a big increase in asthma, in rheumatoid arthritis, in lupus. They've all gone up, right? Now the question is why? It has to be environmental. It can't be genetic because it's too quick for genes to be emerging in the population. Okay. And it must be our lifestyle, and it must be things like processed food, I reckon. Lack of sleep is a big negative for the immune system as well. Really big one, actually. The stress we've just discussed as well. There's more stress out there too. All these are combining to damage our immune systems and increase people's risk of developing these diseases. And it's a big fear. The big reason for climate change being a concern is that's another factor, actually. And people who worry about climate change, they're under stress. That increasing temperature, that's irritating our immune systems as well in various ways. Okay. And there's more toxins in the environment because of this, which damage. For example, floods would allow chemicals to build up in the floodwater, for instance. Ragweed grows at a slightly higher rate and warmer, and there's all pollen coming off the ragweed. So this is an area in immunology that we're looking at the effect of climate change on the immune system. So again, another reason to mitigate is to help our bodies do better.
And does honey help the immune system?
Absolutely. Honey's a great thing. That's right. That's
Absolutely.
really good.
Thank you. Yeah,
that's really good. Yeah.
I remember saying to a GP once, "Is honey it's only glucose?" And
no, the
but then I went somewhere else and they said, "No, it's the antibodies." And
the ancients knew what they were doing, by the way, because some of these herbal things were real. And 2,000 years ago, there was no pharmacy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and they worked it out themselves.
And they say it's honey from the kind of in your locality is the best.
Yeah, the wild honey, whatever
honey,
you call it, seems.
And
and people are analysing the natural constituents to see where the beneficial effects are. So a lot of work is going into this as well, which is great to see.
It's very reassuring. Yeah.
But it is indeed.
I go into the English market in Cork every week. For my jar of honey and a few other things as well. Yeah.
And let's make it. They're not sponsoring us today. So
no, they're not. No, not clear. No, there's too many of them anyway.
There's too many. That's right.
We're talking about cognitive behaviour and so on, or decline and so on like that. I mean, big concerns for people today is dementia, Alzheimer's, and of course there's different forms. And I know you've done a bit of work on this, and again encouraging in terms of potentially what's out there to help.
We've turned a corner, I'd say, at this stage, Micheál, for Alzheimer's, and that's really good. So what Alzheimer's is, people probably know a little bit about it. A protein builds up in your brain, strangely. It's called beta amyloid, and it's a natural protein, but for some reason it starts to clog. And it clogs up your hippocampus, that's where your memories are stored, and begins to destroy that part of your brain, and then you lose your memory. That's the tragic, as we know, part of Alzheimer's. So that's well known. That was discovered by about 50 years ago. This particular protein builds up. Then the drug companies, to give them credit again, as some of the academics got the evidence, what if we mop up that protein? If we can develop a sponge to suck up this protein that's clumping in your hippocampus, maybe we'll see an effect on Alzheimer's. And they must have spent, I don't know, $10 billion testing that idea, huge amount of money. And finally, the sun has come out, 2 clinical trials, 2 separate companies, Eli Lilly and Eisai, who are Japanese, published their trial data last year. They're slowing down Alzheimer's with that approach. Now, they're slowing it down by about a third. We'd like it to be much more than that. There's still a slight question with side effects. Some people do get a brain bleed. They're looking at that very closely. But it's the first time ever in Alzheimer's that they've slowed down progression, which is tremendous. Now, in my experience, and I've been doing this for 35 years, we're now beginning, because it's like fingertips on a cliff face type thing, So now that we've seen a bit of progress, that will galvanise other companies. We'll get involved in this ourselves. Can we get and amazingly, could you get a vaccine? Now imagine if you get your own immune system to clear the plaque. They call it plaque is the name for this. Maybe your own immune system could suck up the noxious stuff. And now there's vaccines in development. Can you imagine if we had a vaccine for Alzheimer's? Now, because it's a few years off. Anybody listening who has a relative. It's still early days, and they've just finished this phase 3. It's about to get approved in America, though, for use, this drug.
And is it a feature of modern age because of the fact that we're living longer as a people, essentially?
First and foremost, is age. It's a disease of aging, and we'll all have some of this in our brains eventually. Kind of thing. As you get older, your brain is less able to clean itself out, I suppose is the way to think of it. And this stuff builds up, so that's a feature. And the second is probably genetic. So some people have certain gene variants, and they promote this in some way. And if you're unlucky, then the wrong genes, and the stuff is building up. And hey, Preston, now from my own research, we discovered a way to stop the inflammation in the brain, because that's really irritating the brain, this stuff, and the inflammatory process goes into overdrive. And one drug that I've helped develop is stopping the inflammation. And the inflammation now is like friendly fire. It's the reason your brain is getting injured, is your own troops in a way are attacking your brain because of this noxious stuff that's there. And our drug is in clinical trials, wonderfully, but not for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's. Now, strangely, the similarities. In Parkinson's, it's a different protein in a different part of your brain, but it's still irritating that part of the brain. And Roche, who bought our drug, they're now doing a trial in Parkinson's, but they'll immediately move into Alzheimer's. If they get it's easier to do a trial in Parkinson's, actually, because you can measure the tremor, you can measure some of the symptoms a bit more straightforwardly. But if it works in Parkinson's, they'll immediately do Alzheimer's next. So we're watching this very closely, because this could be, and it's part of the same idea. What Lilly have done is they're mopping up the noxious stuff. What we're doing is it's stopping the noxious stuff irritating your own body, and you're stopping the irritation. So again, and the point I'd make overall is loads of clinical trials are running now with different approaches. So hence, optimism has never been higher that these awful, like Alzheimer's and motor neuron disease, another one, they're all very similar. We're now beginning to see progress. Now again, you got to be careful, because things can fall over, and it's not for the faint-hearted, this research, because often things fail. But even still, as I'm saying, when I go to conferences, you've never seen such optimism in those diseases. So again, we're on the right track. It's very reassuring.
Oh, yeah, it's great. And then vascular dementia, that's that
another
blood
one.
flow to the head?
Yeah, another one. Yeah. There's different types of Alzheimer's, as you know, and vascular dementia is another one. So in other words, if we can just come up with a way to stop your own body turning on itself, is really the trick here. And these approaches might help to do that. We'll see real progress, I think.
Very good news. Can I thank you so much, Luke, for, I mean, we could go on for another hour.
We could.
I just want to say to you, and I did actually, I think, ring you at
You did. I was very grateful to you, actually.
I just thanked you for, you lifted the,
well, I
nation.
got to thank you for that.
Whether you like it or
Amazed.
not, you did, you know.
Well, it was. I'll just tell your
you
listeners.
were reassuring coming on, and you were never fatalistic.
Well, it was a big thing for me when you rang me. It was New Year's Eve, and I happened to be doing a gig in the Gaiety Theatre on the telly, and you left a message to say thanks very much, and it had a huge effect on me. At that time, that was a low ebb, as you may remember. It was December 31st, 2020. And still, now the vaccine had just been approved, actually. I knew the vaccine was here, but even still, your words of encouragement kept me going, because it wasn't easy at times for me either, by the way.
That was when the Alpha variant was coming.
Exactly.
And the vaccine wasn't there in time, because I remember President von der Leyen coming under enormous pressure. You could feel the panic in the heads of state. Screaming, where are the vaccines? And in fairness, they had told us in November, you will not have them in critical mass until about March, April. Absolutely correct. But the Alpha had arrived, and it was doing incredible damage. And people
that was
were
a low
really,
point.
It was a very low point. I can remember
right,
well. And I was ringing HSA every day
to get updates.
To get updates in terms of the hospital numbers, because we were at the peak. And it was a very difficult time.
It was.
So I was
very
you helped to lift the nation. I just want to say that to you.
Thanks very much.
Along with many others. And thank you. And thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the
Take
chat.
care. Thanks.